In 1968, the most powerful nation on Earth was losing a war to farmers with rifles. They had fighter jets, bombers, helicopters, napalm, and more firepower than any army in history. But in the jungles of Vietnam, none of it was enough. This was not just a war. It was a slow collapse of confidence, control, and belief. After World War II, Vietnam wanted independence from France. But the world had changed. The Cold War had begun, and the United States feared one thing above all else: the spread of communism. American leaders believed that if Vietnam fell, the rest of Southeast Asia would follow. They called it the Domino Theory. At first, America sent advisors, then came money, then came weapons, then came young men. By 1968, more than 500,000 American soldiers were deployed in Vietnam. Most of them were barely 20 years old. They were dropped into a war that had no clear battlefield, no clear enemy, and no clear ending. Vietnam was not Europe. There were no defined front lines. The enemy did not always wear uniforms. The Viet Cong moved silently through jungles and villages. They blended into the population. They built tunnel systems stretching for miles underground. Entire command centers existed beneath the earth. American soldiers faced invisible enemies, booby traps made from sharpened bamboo, hidden explosives buried in dirt paths, snipers concealed in trees. The jungle itself became a weapon. The heat was suffocating. The humidity was relentless. Insects carried disease. Fear followed every step. You could not see the enemy, but the enemy could see you. Then came the moment that shattered the illusion of control. January 1968. During the Vietnamese New Year, known as Tet, communist forces launched one of the largest surprise attacks in modern warfare. Over 100 cities were attacked simultaneously. Even the US embassy in Saigon was breached. Militarily, American forces eventually pushed back the attacks. But psychologically, something broke. For years, the American government had insisted that victory was close, that the enemy was weakening. Tet proved the opposite. The war was not nearly over, and for the first time, Americans watched it unfold on live television. Burning villages, dead soldiers, chaos in the streets. The war was no longer distant. It was in their living rooms. Protests erupted across the United States. College campuses filled with demonstrators. Veterans returned home to a divided country. Trust in government began to erode. Meanwhile, the fighting continued. Bombs rained down across Vietnam. More explosives were dropped on this small country than were used during all of World War II. Napalm scorched forests and villages. Agent Orange poisoned the land, leaving lasting health consequences for generations. And still, the war dragged on. By the early 1970s, public support had collapsed. The United States began withdrawing troops under a policy called Vietnamization. The plan was to transfer responsibility to South Vietnamese forces. But without massive American military backing, the balance shifted quickly. In April 1975, North Vietnamese tanks rolled into Saigon. Helicopters lifted desperate evacuees from rooftops in scenes of chaos and panic. The American embassy was evacuated in a race against time. More than 58,000 American soldiers were dead. Millions of Vietnamese lives had been lost. Entire regions were devastated, and the United States had failed to prevent the very outcome it had entered the war to stop. Vietnam was unified under communist control. The Domino Theory did not unfold as predicted, but the damage was done. The Vietnam War changed America forever. It reshaped foreign policy. It reshaped public trust. It reshaped how wars would be reported and questioned. It forced a superpower to confront an uncomfortable truth. Military strength alone cannot win a war rooted in ideology, culture, and political complexity. Vietnam was not simply a battlefield defeat. It was a psychological turning point. A war that exposed the limits of power. And decades later, one haunting question remains. How did the strongest military in the world lose to an enemy it could barely see?